Welcome, everybody. I'm Mary Sue Barrett, and I'm president of the Metropolitan Planning Council. So welcome on this almost spring day by the calendar, and it's been trending in the right direction. So with the theme of new beginnings, this today's roundtable is right on topic of fresh starts towards issues that we have long grappled with, long struggled with. I'm going to set the stage a little bit and then turn it over to my colleague, Yona Freemark, to introduce our first speaker and to move us into the discussion. I will come back to help us with the panel. And the way we've planned this is to move through that so that we have plenty of time for questions. So not too early to start thinking now about translating some of the ideas from Michigan to our challenges here in Illinois, transference of some of those best practices, ideas for how we can take some fresh approaches. That's really why MPC does roundtables and all the rest of our work is we want to be a problem solver and one of the entities that's helping convene people, but also move us forward together to solve our region's most pressing problems, and in doing so, hopefully fine-tune some approaches that can work for cities and regions everywhere. So we're selfishly focused on the metropolitan Chicago region, but we care about cities and regions everywhere. So Chicago has been a laboratory. I think sometimes it's been a proud laboratory, sometimes less so, and we want to be one of those shining stars in the transportation arena as well. I want to thank Friedman Seating for helping sponsor today's event. They've been a terrific partner of ours for a while. Stan Bresniak and John Paul Peonelsa are joining us here today, so thanks to the Friedman team. And this will not be the only time you hear, but this is your first pitch on joining us in Accelerate Illinois. Accelerate Illinois is a new multi-organizational, inviting individuals and institutions to join us to beat the drums for the urgency for action, highlighting stories, facts, projects, and then the solutions that can make those projects a reality. We know that Illinois has a sad history of enacting 5-year transportation packages every 10 years. So we do have that boom and bust cycle, which is costly, literally, to the pocketbook and costly to all of us as commuters and employers and workers. So we hope you will join us. Many of you already have, thank you, and we're trying to build a groundswell of support. No better person to help us with this conversation kickoff than my colleague, Yona Freemark. Yona's been with MPC about a couple years, joined us as an associate, and quickly was promoted to a manager. If you've seen our analysis over the last year and a half of the Illiana Expressway based on IDOT data, that was Yona's work. If you've seen the transit-oriented development initiatives, the community building initiatives we did this past year in Uptown and in Logan Square about properties right by transit stations that are going to be bid out and what the potential is to do something really cutting edge and innovative there. Yona was part of that team, so that was his work as well. And what we like to do is to surround ourselves with innovative and smart people, and Yona's one of those. He also brings a perspective of having studied and worked in a bunch of other places that we ought to be learning from, whether it's Paris or London, New York. All of those are places where Yona has spent time either studying or working and brings that perspective here. You may also, if you are someone who follows the transportation issues online, be familiar with Yona as a very prolific writer under the Transport Politic blog. So I encourage you to follow him on Twitter if you don't already. So Yona's going to help us set the stage a little bit so that you know where we've been and where we hope to go. And then we'll hear from our guest from Michigan, and a terrific panel will help us tease out some of the lessons and share their expertise and also be available, all of them, to answer questions. So Yona, I'm turning it over to you. Thanks.
Thanks, Mary Sue. I promise I did not ask for any sort of glowing introduction like that, but I appreciate it, Mary Sue. But I really appreciate everyone for coming out today. I think this is going to be a really exciting event to learn about what our transportation agencies are doing in the Chicago region, but also what some other states are doing, specifically Michigan, to fund transportation, to make sure that we address some of our problems. So I wanted to start out this roundtable just with a quick poll of the people in the room. All right, so if you got to work today or got to this roundtable by driving or by biking, raise your hand. Okay, I would say about a quarter of the audience. Now keep your hands up if over the last month, while you've been driving or biking, you've run into a pothole or had to be diverted onto another road because of some sort of problem on the street. Keep your hand up. Okay, so that's everybody. I didn't see any hands go down. Okay, so that's interesting. All right, who got here by transit today? Wow, okay, so we have a big transit audience, similar to downtown commuters in general. So keep your hand up if you've been delayed over the last month by something like a mechanical problem, a signal delay, anything like that. Okay, so that's, again, almost everybody who got here by transit. So it's interesting. We're used to it. Okay. All right, so last question. Remember to keep your hand up afterwards. Have you ever attended a ribbon cutting for an infrastructure project? Okay, I would say about half the room. Keep your hand up. Now, has that ribbon cutting been for something like a pothole or a signal repair? Keep your hand up. All right, so the answer was nobody. This is a problem, and that's what we're here to talk about today. The critical importance of funding our regular transportation infrastructure. You know, the potholes, the signal repairs, the issues we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. Excuse me. The reality is, these problems affect people throughout Illinois on a daily basis. If you've seen some of the work that MPC has been doing over the last few months, you know that we've been profiling people throughout the state. And Andrea B. from Peoria is one of them. This is a real person. It's not a made-up picture. Andrea B. Runs into potholes all the time in Peoria. And I'm not insulting the Peoria Transportation Department. I'm sure they're fine. But she has a lot of problems with potholes. And last year, this cost her $800 in repairs to her car because fundamentally, the potholes were causing damage. And this is true for people throughout the state. In fact, we estimate that up to $3.7 billion are spent by people in Illinois fixing their cars because of infrastructure problems that they're running into. And it's not just people driving. People in transit are routinely delayed by problems with infrastructure that we need to be solving. For example, there's a switch up in Libertyville that causes about 15 minutes of delay all the time. And that switch, when thought of over the course of a year, can cause some commuters to waste 130 hours. 130 hours that they could be spending time with their families or at their jobs if they feel like it. That's time wasted that we shouldn't be wasting. Now, as you'll hear from our transportation agencies right over here in just a minute, and from Director of Michigan DOT, our transportation agencies are doing a lot with the money that they have. In fact, they're spending billions of dollars every year in what they do have, in fixing the potholes that we have, fixing the signals, things like that. But the fact is that we're asking them to do more with less every single year. And we're running into a limit. There's only so much you can do with a declining amount of money. And that's what this graph shows. This graph shows that on a per-person basis in Illinois, the amount of revenues that we're collecting from motor fuel tax have declined by more than a third over the past 25 years, even as construction costs have doubled. Now that strikes a really sad portrait of what we're able to do with the funding that we're collected. And the reality is that we're losing out on up to $900 million in annual revenues because of this declining chart. And we're not getting much help from the federal government either. In fact, federal government revenues haven't really caught up, and our panelist Tom Kazarek will tell us a little bit more about that. Now, states are looking within themselves to collect more revenues, to fund the transportation problems, to fix the transportation problems that we're experiencing on a day-to-day basis. This map shows the states that have either addressed this problem by finding more revenues for transportation over the last 3 years, or, as Michigan is doing this year, are looking to find new revenues for transportation. Now, does anybody see a certain state missing from this map? Illinois is what I'm looking for. So the result is we're being left in the dust and coated with rust. It's bad. So the message that we're trying to send today is that our region's transportation agencies, and indeed our state's transportation agencies, fundamentally need more revenues to respond to our transportation woes that are affecting people in their personal lives and in their wallet on a day-to-day basis. CMAP, our regional planning organization, estimates that over the next 25 years, we have about a $40 billion gap in how much money we need to maintain the system in a state of good repair, which effectively means filling those potholes, fixing those signals. And its board has endorsed a number of revenue sources, such as an increase in the motor fuel tax, congestion pricing, and performance-based funding. These revenues are vital to making sure that we keep our system running and keep our economy moving. And the good news is that MPC is working with CMAP, as well as RTA, and a number of different agencies, all shown on this slide here, in a new coalition called Accelerate Illinois, as Mary Sue brought up a second ago. Now, you see a little handout there. We're very excited about having individuals go to the website and join, and we're also excited about having other agencies and other businesses sign on to say, we need to fix our transportation problems with new revenues. We have an ambitious goal of raising up to $2 billion in new annual revenues for transportation in Illinois. We know it's a big goal, but we think we can make it. These funds will help us pay for the projects that are vital for our communities. And in fact, on your seat, you can see a map of a certain Senate district. Everyone has a different map. That Senate district is going to get a number of potential project improvements, but some of those projects just aren't funded yet. We need new funding to make sure that they're going to happen. Now, we think that as part of this campaign, we can learn a lot from other states around the country. And so we were very excited about the opportunity to invite Kirk Steudle, who's the director of the Michigan Department of Transportation. He's here today to talk about what he's doing in Michigan and what the governor of Michigan is doing to support increased revenues for transportation in that state, which is facing many of the same challenges that we have today. We're excited to hear what lessons Michigan has and welcome you up to give your presentation. But I just wanted to give a quick rundown of how this is going to work. Director Steudle is going to give his presentation. Then we're going to have a little panel right over here. And then we're going to have the Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions for any of these people, make sure to save them until the very end. So let's welcome up Director Steudle.
Well, thank you, and thanks for the invitation to be here. Wow, a packed house. This is great. The only time I've gotten a packed house lately is when I'm testifying in front of a 3-committee hearing about why I did something according to an audit that didn't turn out right. As I've referred to, as we've had a lot of molehills getting blown into mountains lately in the capital in Michigan, and frankly, it's all related to this. It's related to transportation revenue. It is, as I've told my staff, we have this huge magnifying glass, larger than any of us that are in that agency have ever endured before. I've been there for going on 28 years. I started as an engineer trainee. I've been the director for going on the last, I'm just about to finish 10 years under 2 different administrations. And it is unlike anybody has ever seen. The magnifying glass, any little thing, if there's a pencil out of place, it seems like that gets an audit report. I think the auditors are living in our agency right now. In fact, the media, this is interesting that we've had 3 audit reports come out about every other week, and the media start to saying, what's up with them? So there's another one coming out, and I'm waiting for the media to go right back to them and say, why are you trying to get this ballot proposal to fail? So it's great to be with you and to talk about this long and bumpy journey. And it's bumpy because there's potholes along the way. There's bridges that are out. There's detours. There are all kinds of complications. I was encouraged as you were going over your alliance, and frankly, you got a great foundation of groups there. I would just continue to add. So let's. I'm going to give you. I always find it's good to have a little kind of a place setting, right? So let's. How do you compare Michigan and Illinois? Some of you just, Michigan is that far up north state. It's like Neverland. It really is only about an hour and away. Some of you kind of slip around the edge of the corner and spend lots of time in southwest Michigan and our lakes and the rest. We'd prefer you actually purchase some gas while you're there. We don't have toll roads. I contribute when I come here. I'd like you to contribute when you go there anyways. So one of the things that's interesting, people think of Michigan, and it's this, if you look at the map of the United States, it's the hand, right, at the top of the United States, and it's a peninsula, and we're kind of stuck in the middle of nowhere. But if you look at North America, which is actually a little bit more real than just an artificial political boundary, we actually are in the middle of mega regions. If you draw a line from St. Louis, Chicago, Detroit, Toronto, in that mega region in the Midwest, it all goes through Detroit, goes through Chicago. All that freight that is either sitting on the rail line, can't get through. Maybe it's sitting there and plugging up an Amtrak train, Mr. Szabo, or it's on a truck. I mean, I drove over along I-94 today with, an amazing amount of trucks. So as Governor Snyder came in, he said, we were having a little battle over building a new bridge between Michigan and Ontario. And what was interesting is all the surrounding states around us supported building that bridge except ours. And that was because of political influence by the guy that owns the private bridge that goes across there right now. And the governor said, look, we need to think broader. We need to think, and this is really setting the stage for this discussion about infrastructure. He said, this really is not about a local bridge. This is about the economy, and frankly, it's the economy of the middle of the country. So he really pushed us to think about exports. We've actually increased the amount of agricultural exports, almost doubled from where they were 4 years ago, and they're continuing to do that. So we started looking, well, what are the natural logistics advantages that we have? And frankly, you could go back probably 100 years and look at what the logistics were from the rail perspective in St. Louis versus Chicago. And frankly, Chicago has eaten St. Louis's lunch in the last 100 years, and now it's all here. But 100 years ago, it wasn't. And around Southeast Michigan, we've grown up with a whole bunch of freeways, lots of good port access, and good rail access, and it's just always been there. It's like the light switch. You flip it on, you just expect it to be there. And we've pretty much taken it for granted. We have the two of the top three busiest border crossings in the country, and across those border crossings, 35% of the trade between the U.S. and Canada flows. $835 billion moves across the rail lines, the highways, and the ports through Michigan every year. So that's kind of just the backdrop. Here's a highway system. Those of you that venture a little bit to the east may have driven on some of those. What's interesting is I was very interested in the comments of the pothole people because I thought there was only potholes in Michigan. At least that's what I hear. Now I have a daughter that lives in Belvedere, so I'm here occasionally, and I chuckle when they say we have the biggest potholes and the worst potholes, and I'm thinking, you haven't traveled much either, have you? Because go to Illinois, go to Pennsylvania, go to New York. Anybody that's in that freeze-thaw climate, I'm sorry, it happens, right? And of course, legislators think that we just don't know how to build roads. I tell them, show me the money, we'll make it last. So one of the other complicating factors is we have 616 agencies that have jurisdiction over roads. We have 79 agencies that have jurisdiction over transit. We have 240 airports. Now, a lot of them are small general aviation airports. There's 13 big airports that have their own authorities. So when it comes to funding, that's the distribution chart. Now, it's purposely a little fuzzy because unless you're a CPA, it's really hard to read it. And so when you boil all those down, the money goes in the top, and then there's all these things that get pulled off. And, all of those 600 agencies, or when you add in all the rest, probably 800 agencies, are all represented somewhere here. So anytime you talk about changing that, you immediately have ticked somebody off because you're taking their cheese, and they don't particularly like it. So I'm going to talk about highways because it's the biggest chunk of what we have in Michigan. In fact, our Constitution says it limits us that we can spend up to 10% of our motor fuels and registration fees on transit. So we have a cap. I mean, we have a constitutional cap. The only way that changes is by a vote of the people. So I'm going to use the discussion about transit, about highways, but understand the transit component is in the same dire shape all the way across the state, and frankly, what we do have is marginal. So here's where we've been. Now the blue bars, that's the investments that have been back since 1996. The last gas tax was in 1997, so you can see the jump right here, okay? And then it proceeded to go up, peaked about 2006, and it came down. You see 2009, there's another little spike. That was ARA. Remember, we were going to fix all the nation's roads and bridges. Okay, that's how much money was there for roads. The other 94% went to somewhere else. I don't know where that was. It did not go to me. So 2009, 2010, that little blip there. But other than that, you can see the revenue starting to go down. Now you'll see a big spike in 14. Well, what's that about? Must be we solved the problem. Actually, that's general fund money. Up until 2013, we had never had general fund money in our budget. So they put general fund money in to basically do projects in districts across the state that legislators picked. That was real fun, let me tell you. There's $20 billion worth of projects, and let's put $200 million in and see what we can do. Everybody thought they were going to solve the problem. But so if you take that little chunk away, the curve continues to go down. Now the red line across the top is the pavement condition. So the last time we raised the fuel tax in 1997, you can see we're at 67% good roads. The goal was by 2007 to get to 90%. You can see we did that. But you know what? We did that with bonding, because the discussion at the time was we needed about 10 or 11 cents. That was the discussion. Politically in 97, we can get 4. They got 4. Trouble is they pretended it was 12. They built a lot of projects. I currently have about $2.2 billion in bonds. I pay $240 million a year, first check I write, to pay off the debt. It'll go from now till 2037 for projects built in the late 90s, early 2000s, under 2 different administrations of both parties. So I tell folks, be careful what mud you start throwing, because you're going to find some on yourself as well. So that's taken $200 million right out of the revenue streams. This is just the trunk line. So this is the state roads, the interstates, the U.S. routes, the state M routes. If you add the rest of the federal aid eligible roads in, which are county primary roads, city major streets, these are actual pavement condition numbers by our Asset Management Council that looks at all of these. And the 14 numbers aren't on here yet, but there's a big spike in the red from 14 from last year's winter. And it's not really a surprise. So it's pretty simple when you put this in front of an audience at home or legislators and say, you don't need to be a rocket scientist to figure out this is not sustainable and we're headed down fast. So we've had this long timeline. I mentioned the decade of bonding in the 90s and the 2000s. 2008, under the prior governor, this is right on the heels of having shut down the government, big battles. We had split. We had a Republican legislature. We had a Democratic governor. Big battles over the budget. Right after that, the only thing they could agree on is let's come up with a blue ribbon committee to study transportation needs. Okay, great. So we did that. 2008, got all done. It was co-chaired by the head of the Chamber of Commerce and the labor unions, 2 of them, and they went through. They agreed on all of them. They got all done, and then along comes ARA and said, "Wait, this will solve all of our problems." And all it did was postpone the conversation. It then moves into a governor's, it's the last year for Governor Granholm. There's an election going on. Nobody's going to do anything then. The 2011, Governor Snyder's elected. He comes in. He starts talking broadly about the investments in infrastructure and talking about starting with the bridge, and says, fundamentally, we've got to take care of our own house. And frankly, what he's done in the last 3 years is he has changed the foundation for the future. He's paid long-term debt. He's restructured so that our retirement system is solvent. In fact, all of the state's bonds get paid off. And what he has commonly said many times, he said, you want a really good job? In 2038, run for governor of Michigan, because there'll be no debt. It's all on schedule to be paid off. So he's put that foundation in place. And he looked at this and said, this is exactly what we're going to do with this. So he said he's not afraid of taking on very tough issues that nobody's dealt with. So 9 months into his first term, he releases what's called a special message on infrastructure. And I'll talk about that in a little bit greater detail. Then you'll notice A year and a half later in 13, and in 14, he continues to call for it in his State of the State address. And you notice the bottom one, he's called for it again in the State of the State address. So he's told them, look, this needs to be dealt with. Here's what he said in 2011, we need $1.4 billion. That's 4 years ago. And we need bold changes. We need to structurally change the way we're doing all of this. In the end, better roads, better transit drives better jobs. The response from the legislature, oh, wait, can't we just get more money from Washington? That's the answer. They have money. They have lots. Can't we convert all of our roads to toll roads? I answer that question at every single group that I go to. Well, Indiana has a toll road. Ohio does. Why isn't I-94? So you have to start over on the basic premise as to what is a toll road, who paid for what, and the real possibility. I usually ask the group who wants a toll road and who doesn't. It's usually 50-50. And largely, it's our own political or our own society that have said, yeah, we're not really interested in doing that. I've said, sorry, I think the best toll road would be I-94 right up the west side of Michigan. You all have transponders and you'd pay it like that. And then, of course, the big thing is, well, can't we get rid of these big trucks? The big trucks are what's killing our roads, and we just have to get rid of those and all the problems will be solved. Yeah, don't even get me started on that whole myth. And then transportation agencies need to get more efficient. I heard this pounded at me time and time again in committee hearings, and I looked and said, how do you get $1 billion worth of savings out of $1 billion budget? I mean, there's just complete disconnect. I don't get it. But, so we went about doing it. We said, all right, you want efficiencies? We're going to drive efficiencies. Major reorganization in 2011, getting ready for the special message. We said, look, we've got to be leaner and meaner. We've got to be more cost effective. We've got to be more innovative. So we started at about $55 million. Actually, this number got changed yesterday. Annually, we are starting to accrue $100 million worth of annual savings from innovations and adaptation of technology that are reoccurring every single year. A whole bunch of other issues that we're advancing as well, bond refinancing, and then some one-time savings. So we looked at the legislature and said, okay, we did our part, now you do your part. Yeah, not so fast, they say. Well, we need you to be more accountable. Okay, here's the dashboard. The governor came in, he's big on metrics, very big on metrics. Here's the Michigan dashboard, then there's an infrastructure dashboard, there's an MDOT scorecard, there's an MDOT system measures, there's an asset management council. There's a whole bunch of things. Over there is kind of an example. Road construction projects, one of our goals, completed on time, 99.7%. Of course, to the auditors, that would not be effective. They would give us moderately effective because they did. It was actually on bridge inspections. We did 99.8% of the bridge inspections on time over a 3-year period, and we got moderately effective. Really, 14,000 bridges, 35 were not done on time. I said, I don't get you guys. So all of those, and it's on a public-facing website, right? So all of this stuff, right, is being built for the backdrop of the agency, because who in their right mind in any state is going to say, let's give more money to a bungling agency, right? So you can't go out and kick the agency that you're going to end up giving money to. You got to find ways for them to be more effective, more efficient, and they got to promote that, because that's who you're going to rely on to do that, all of those projects or do all those investments. It takes a lot of partnerships. Here's, I would encourage you to look at this website. This is not a State of Michigan website. It's a website of partners, much like the ones you had up here. It's called justfixtheroads.com. And you'll notice there's transit agencies that are in that coalition as well. And that group could be much more vocal. Your Accelerate Illinois group can be much more vocal than a state agency can. I mean, we can get whipsawed back and forth. You need to be very careful. And you need that broad membership all the way across. We have developed a bunch of communications tools, and we just went directly to the people. We've got brochures on the bottom, we got white papers, we got videos. I would encourage you to take a look at both of these. Again, this was trying to just set the facts. What really irritated me in the last year is people were having debates and they were making stuff up. whether it was truck weights or it was how we pick projects or you name it, everybody had their own opinion, and they said, well, that's what's happening because they didn't know. And we'd say, okay, that's a question. We're going to dive into it. We're going to provide you the fact. It's here on the website. Maybe there's a brochure. And then we had some fun doing some videos. Check out the videos. They're only a couple minutes long, and my favorite one is, why are Ohio roads better than Michigan? And nothing makes a Michigan resident burn more than say Ohio is better in anything. And the sad fact is we have one of our communications guys standing by the Ohio-Michigan border, and he says, ouch. The trouble is they invest $1 billion a year more in roads, bridges, and buses than we do in the state of Michigan and have been for the last 9 years. $9 billion investment, that's what you get. Check them out. They're usually a little tongue-in-cheek, so they're kind of fun. We got a lot of response from those. So the results is they kicked this thing around and around and around, and last December they finally they came up to a solution. This was during the lame duck session, $1.2 billion a year, and it basically removes the sales tax off the top. We charge sales tax in Michigan, 6% sales tax. That's a low number, isn't it? Would you like 6% sales tax? 6% sales tax, but we charge it on everything except food and medicine. We charge it on motor fuels. That generates about $1 billion. That, in our Constitution, sales tax, according to the Constitution, has to go to schools and cities. So you pay a sales tax, that tax doesn't go to roads. They pay a flat cents per gallon that goes to roads. So takes the sales tax off the top, leaves you room on the cents per gallon to actually increase it. But when you take that sales tax off, it creates a hole. So to fill the hole, you have to increase the sales tax, and that takes a vote of the people. That's how we are at a ballot referendum for May. The vote of the people is to raise the sales tax from 6% to 7% that funds schools, cities. There's an earned income tax credit that comes along as well. Interestingly, there's a bunch of folks that are saying, well, we want this to fail so we can get to Plan B, and Governor Snyder has said there is no Plan B. Plan B is we're going to be way back, and there's a bunch of legislators say, I got Plan B, and the answer is when you find 55 of your friends in the Michigan House that agree with you, then you have a real Plan B, and until then, it's just a pipe dream. So here's some of the details, and I won't go into the big pieces or in detail, but the big piece that's here is the fuel tax. It changes it to a percentage at the wholesale level. It increases registration fees on those heavy trucks, $1,000 on 160,000-pound trucks, $100 on a 26,000-pound truck. 160,000-pound truck is a log truck, a steel hauler, a gravel train, or a grain truck. Now, if you've never seen one of those in your subdivision street, you can't blame a heavy truck for beating your subdivision street up, but there are people that were. Now, the other piece that's in here is a bunch of protections and a bunch of transparency. There's an increased use of pavement warranties. The state of Michigan, we've been doing pavement warranties since 1997. We have 3,500 warranties so far. The second state in the country is Florida at about 2,500, and the third state, I don't remember which one it is, might be Wisconsin at 150. So we are adding about 300 or 400 warranties, project with warranties, and what this bill did was required on all local projects as well. Any project over $1 million has to have some kind of guarantee that keeps the contractor on the hook, that if they do something wrong, wrong materials, wrong workmanship, they got to come back and fix it. I can tell you from a campaign's perspective, that piece resonates with voters. They get that, they understand it. The other piece that resonates with voters is safety. Now, this last State of the State address, the governor called for this increase in road funds. And he's actually got a new calling card. He was out yesterday with the sheriffs and a couple city managers, a couple city mayors, and said, this is a safety issue. So the two issues that have resonated with Michigan voters in all of the focus groups is guarantees of doing good work, accountability, value for money, and safety. So we're focusing on how many bridges have plywood holding up into the concrete that's falling, what potholes do, what happens when you swerve to miss a pothole, there's an accident. Those two things seem to be resonating mostly with voters. forget the fact that we can actually talk about the tax structure and how it makes sense. If there's an educated group that really wants to understand, we'll dive into that with them. But the campaign to the masses, as you know, doesn't always reflect reality. It's about what gets people's attention so that they pay attention to the issue and the message. So we are 48 days away from May 5th, and it'll be an exciting time. So I hope we can get there, but frankly, this goes back, it was right where you are today, is the foundation of all of you coming together. I would encourage you to expand that group wider, because the other influential group that's in Michigan is the schools, because the schools will benefit from this ballot proposal as well. So we have the school superintendents that are coming out saying this is the right thing to do. We got those, we got the sheriffs. And so I would encourage you to make your base as big as possible and bring as many people in to help cover all of those different political landscapes that you're going to encounter. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you. Thanks.
That was terrific, Director Steudle. And we're going to move into some questions. First, I'm going to bring in our local players, and then we're going to invite Kirk to be part of that as well, building on what he shared with us. I'm going to just highlight a couple things. You've got the bios of our local leaders in front of you. What I want to point out is the interesting collection of folks here that have played roles in multiple levels of government and with multiple agencies. I see that as a huge strength, that you understand the perspective of learning lessons, transferring lessons, forming alliances, etc. And we're delighted to welcome Tom Kotarek home to Chicago. He has been working for 13 years on Capitol Hill, most recently for Senator Durbin, also for Congressman Luis Gutierrez, and on transportation, appropriations, a whole host of capital issues, water, etc. And so he's been there drafting legislation, he's been there helping lead coalitions, and now gets to, as the Deputy Executive Director of CMAP, help us on a regional basis figure out how to be proactive problem solvers. So we're going to be very interested to hear about your insights, fresh with that new perspective. Also delighted that Leanne Redden, the Executive Director of the Regional Transportation Authority, has joined us. All of these folks have been partners with MPC for years, and you've maybe seen them at prior events because they're great. They're experts and they're doers. Leanne has been tapped first acting and then as permanent Executive Director of the Regional Transportation Authority. I first got to work with Leanne when she was at the tollway, and even before that, working at the municipal level in Schaumburg. And these ranges of experiences of knowing how the big decisions play out at every level of government is invaluable. I know that Leanne is brought professionalism to the RTA, doing the work on customer service, on analysis of data, on market trends. They've been our partner on a host of things. Often you'll see RTA leading working groups on the big thorny issues, so we're really grateful. She also serves on CMAP's board, and as you'll hear when you start listening to her talk, she is not a native of Chicago. And finally, Rebecca Scheinfeld, who is CDOT's commissioner. Rebecca also brings this perspective, been in the commissioner's role for a couple years, worked on transportation issues for and infrastructure issues broadly for Mayor Emanuel's transition team, and also worked as the head of planning overall for the Chicago Transit Authority. So we couldn't get a lot of the things that are important to MPC done without her leadership as well. What Rebecca has done, and I got a chance to hear you speak at the City Club recently, where she did just a fabulous job, if some of you were there, highlighting the whole range of departmental initiatives. Today we're kind of zeroing in on the long-term capital infrastructure side, but I do want to note that having competent operational folks at the helm who can also simultaneously look long-term is a huge asset. In your work day to day, and also in your speech to the City Club, you talked about some of those longer-term issues that I hope we have a chance to touch on today, including Loop Link, which debuted in the last couple days as far as the construction phase of the new central area bus rapid transit, which we at MPC are really excited about. So I'm going to move into some questions. First, I'm going to give an opening question to each of them to share some initial thoughts. Then I'm going to toss out one or two questions that any of them can comment on, and then turn to you to bring you into that conversation. So Tom, I get to start with you. You do have this fresh perspective, and I'd like you to help us set the context a bit. So you've seen debates go up to the deadline and still not get resolved. You've seen very short-term federal bills, and you've seen, as the chart that Yona shared with you, those 15 states that have acted in recent years and more that are acting now. I think it's a fair statement to say they are doing that because they can't wait for the federal government to act. So from your perspective, what do we need to take into account about what's pending at the federal level, and how can we leverage our debate here in Illinois?
Sure. I just always talk very loudly. First and foremost, thanks for having me, Mary Sue, here at MPC. It's great to be home and good to see a lot of friendly faces. I've been out for a long time, and back here in Chicago to work more closely with all of you in person is a huge thing for me. And just wanted to also say that it's great for me to be next to Rebecca and Leanne, who are two of the best pros that we have in the state for transportation, and I've got the pleasure to work with them on a ton of issues over the last decade plus years. So thanks. I don't bring a lot of good optimistic news from Washington, D.C., so don't be shocked. The picture is not rosy.
You want to do some more intros? You want to do some more nice
That's right.
comments?
And Kirk, a good new friend from Michigan. So I just was jotting down what sort of we've done in Washington in the last 10 plus years or so in the last few transportation bills, and just the struggles that we've had. So I looked at ICE-T when we were doing ICE-T in the 90s. There was one extension, and it took 6 months before we completed that bill. T21, 12 extensions, and a year and 10 months. And then Safety Loop, which took us 10 extensions, 2 years, and 9 months. And here we are with MAP 21, our first extension, lasting 8 months, going to expire May 31st. So in 2008, that's really where we started to struggle with the Highway Trust Fund. Essentially, we're on a path right now where we're bringing in about $35 billion each year, and we're spending out $50 billion. So Congress has had to put in general fund revenues into the Highway Trust Fund each year since 2008. The first time that it happened very quickly. You're exactly right. It was one of those last-minute deals, $8 billion fused into the Highway Trust Fund. Most recently, when we were completing MAP 21, we put in another infusion of general fund revenues. This time, the new Congress insisted that they be offset. So I wanted to just jot down and let you guys, if you didn't know what's in the Highway Trust Fund now. We have roll-your-own cigarette machines. Not sure if everyone's familiar with what those are, but we found out from the Joint Tax Committee that if you take these large machines that folks bring loose tobacco and put it in the machine and it kicks out regular cigarettes, well, that's a lot cheaper than you buying a pack of Marlboros. If we treated that like a pack of Marlboros, the Joint Tax Committee gave us $94 million. So we put that into the Highway Trust Fund.
You can smoke that.
Smoke that. The ocean freight differential, not sure if a lot of folks are familiar with that, but we ended that. Got $1 billion for doing so. Medicaid payments to Louisiana post-disaster were a little bit more high than we thought, so we trimmed those a bit, got a few $1 billion, put that in the Highway Trust Fund. We've been paying states to maintain abandoned mines for a little bit longer than they should, by decades, so we ended that, and we got about $1 billion for doing so. And then pension smoothing. That's probably what you may have heard about. It's a little bit difficult to explain here, but it gives us $10, $20 billion, depending on how big you make that window of smoothing, into the Highway Trust Fund. So since 2008...
Real long-term transportation-related sources.
Correct.
Yeah.
Since 2008, we've put $65 billion into the Highway Trust Fund. We are essentially now running a Highway Trust Fund that is composed of 20% or more in general fund revenues. And guess what? The bill is coming due again in less than 6 work weeks in Washington, D.C. And, if I'm a betting man, I'm not going to put a lot of money on us doing a 6-year long-term bill, which would cost us anywhere between $90 and $100 billion just to keep revenues flat. So I think today's discussion is incredibly important and super timely because the federal government is not going to be coming in to our rescue. And being back home is a really great time for all of us to get this media attention and work together to really talk about ways that we could generate revenues ourselves. It's going to be up to us to create our own destiny, and I don't have to convince anyone here how important Illinois' transportation network is to daily lives and our economy. It's enormous and it's huge. If we don't act, we're going to have serious consequences.
Thank you very much, Tom. It's not what we want to hear, right? Any of us, but we are in a self-help era, and Illinois needs to act in that context that you shared with us very helpfully. Leanne, I'm going to move to you next. Part of what we heard Director Steudle talk about is the difficulty of managing a multi-year effort when you've got projects that come out of left field, right, from a legislator or someone else. A lot of folks have remarked that the RTA has brought the agencies together, confidence, competence of the operating agencies in delivering on projects, and collaboration seems to be trending positively. Do you see it that way, and is that something to build off of as we are trying to restore confidence to build the case for investment?
Yes, short answer, and I'm never short. So I think there is a renewed, and it is legitimate and it is genuine, a renewed sense of cooperation amongst us and the 3 transit operators, CTA, Metra, and PACE. And I think that's very encouraging for all of us. I do think actually we worked well together, contrary to maybe some media headlines over the past years, but we weren't good about necessarily telling some of that story. So that's actually been a focus of mine to sort of make sure we are working very collaboratively together, because it's going to be, after Tom's intro, I'm ready to slip my wrists, I think. It's like, what's the point? But it is challenging. I mean, it's going to be a long, hard slog, and I think the frustrating part, at least where I sit, is it's not just on the federal side, it's also on the state side for us as well. And, if you'd asked me some of these questions a few months ago, I would have been all excited. I was all excited about sort of in the transit space, just looking in that world right now, we had all collectively, 4 agencies worked hard to balance the budgets, get them approved ahead of our statutory deadlines, no annual food fight, as I tend to call it. And I think we'd made some really good, laid a solid foundation for moving forward with what I was hoping was going to be just a focused capital fight, a push for capital funding both at the federal and the state level. And unfortunately now, at least at the state level, now we're going to be having a big fight and debate on both the operating and the capital side. And I worry that capital is getting sort of shoved to the side. On the federal side, it's still there. We have, I think, come together well as 4 agencies and collectively, talking about what our issues, our needs are. We've already had 2 joint delegation trips to Washington, and Tom, wearing his former hat, can attest to sort of when all 4 of us walk in together to meet with our Illinois delegation, it has a lot stronger message. And it shows people that it's not just lip service, we are actually working together and talking about what our collective needs are, because they are great. Because of the years of lack of investment on the capital side, we have fallen way behind. And in the transit space right now, we need to be on an annual basis essentially doubling the amount of investment that we make to our capital infrastructure just to keep the system where it's at today. And that's nothing to really get excited about. And unfortunately, I don't know if does anyone watch John Oliver on HBO? If he saw a couple of weeks ago, he's absolutely fantastic. I encourage everybody to go watch it. And if it wasn't for some of the extra language, we probably could use it a lot more. But it's an amazing and a well sort of thought out piece in terms of sort of how we have all this infrastructure sort of to the pothole point. I mean, in our space, it's signal systems, it's switches. You know, people want to do ribbon cuttings for the Englewood flyover, and that's a fantastic project and a wonderful accomplishment for our region. People want new shiny buses and rail cars, and again, they're also great additions to our fleet. But you know, we've got billions we need to be spending on signal switches, which are invisible. And the reason why I brought up the John Oliver piece, because they have this whole thing about how transportation infrastructure is not sexy, and they keep repeating that over and over again. It's rather amusing. But it isn't, and it's hard to explain to people why they should get excited about, you know, a multi-million-dollar investment into signal switches. And so that's part of what we've also been focusing on, not just sort of documenting and coming up with numbers to show what our capital needs are, but also now focusing our efforts on sort of campaigns and sort of telling the story. And, you know, we've joined you guys with Accelerate at the state level. We have Getting America to Work Coalition that we spearheaded nationally with transit agencies across the country to help sort of have us tell a very simple story about what our needs are and have us all talking off the same song sheet. You know, we go through you know, new Congress comes in and the learning curve starts again. And, you know, it's incredibly frustrating when you get sort of freshman members of Congress, you're starting the whole conversation again with the education. And, you know, just to give one simple example, you know, we're talking about funding, and I feel like a lot of members of Congress are talking about financing. And we need both, but we can't support financing without some funding. And it's, you know, financing is not a silver bullet. You know, I think we've got a lot of those tools. You know, CTA is leveraging federal TIFIA loan funds, and we are doing a lot of what we can to sort of help ourselves at home.
Yes.
With that, I'll be quiet because I'm sure there's.
I think we are turning over every rock, and both Tom and Leanne's comments already have helped hammer home this point about the importance of restoring confidence and telling the story. I'm so glad you brought up the John Oliver spoof piece. He actually spent 20 minutes on his show talking about infrastructure. It's got, last time I looked, it had 3 million views on YouTube. So it's reaching somebody, and the message, I think, in the irreverent style of his is very similar to what our message is today, which is we literally can't afford to wait, and that you know, big scissors to cut the big ribbon in front of the maintenance project doesn't typically happen, but perhaps should, because that's what's going to make a difference in people's lives. So thank you for helping set the stage as well with the story from our transit agencies and their competence. Rebecca, of course, you've been there at the transit agencies, but also now at CDOT. And one of the realities of being a municipal manager is you got to work with what you got. And I know that this restoring confidence theme is also about showing people that the city is getting things done. So I'd like you to, you know, maybe share with us a typical day in a crew's life, or, you know, what's happening today that people can see and know that, of course, there's more to be done. But perhaps pairing that with what you can't do.
Thanks, Mary Sue, and echoing a lot of what Tom and Leanne touched on, despite the uncertainty at the state and federal level in terms of having long-term dedicated sources for transportation, we've been working aggressively at the local level to make sure that we're leveraging all available resources and being as efficient and effective as possible. In the last 4 years, under Mayor Emanuel's leadership, just CDOT alone has expended $2.2 billion in transportation investments. And that's not even counting the additional billions that the CTA has been investing in the transit infrastructure, as well as Department of Water Management and other city departments and our partners in the region. So there is a lot going in, and that's just on the capital side. On the operating side, we're out in the neighborhoods across the city every day delivering those critical neighborhood services, which we know are the little things that build up to really improve quality of life for the residents of the city and businesses, which all builds into opportunities to continue to grow the economy in the city, which is the anchor for the region. And so it's critical that we're not only being aggressive about maintaining our capital needs, but also pushing on a daily basis with those daily operating and neighborhood services. For those of you who are here, you know we've been doing a record amount of paving and pothole work. 'Tis pothole season now. Last year we filled 920,000 potholes, if you can imagine. And that's because we had crews out 7 days a week working throughout that polar vortex of the winter last year. This year, thanks to additional resources dedicated to our budget from Mayor Emanuel, we've had more crews working throughout the winter to stay ahead of potholes. And so we're in really good shape ramping into the spring now, where we'll see more of the freeze-thaw action that every year takes a toll on our roads. But more importantly, also making sure that we're making those capital investments so that we can bring up the average age of our infrastructure. And with paving, again, we did a record amount last year, 343 miles, together with other city departments and private utilities. And the mayor set a new standard for collectively doing at least 300 miles of paving a year, so that we're on track to repave half the city's roadways and alleyways in just 8 years. So that's the type of example of where we are pushing to use every available dollar to make those critical transportation investments that are so important to quality of life for our residents and economic growth and jobs development. That $2.2 billion that we expended to CDOT alone, that's estimated to have created more than 7,000 jobs. And it's really about affecting people's daily lives, whether it's about the roads they're driving on or the job opportunities that they have. The mayor's also been really aggressive about capturing as many discretionary competitive dollars as possible, whether that's federal Tiger grants or innovative financing opportunities like TIFIA. We mentioned the CTA is already using TIFIA. We're using TIFIA to build the Riverwalk downtown, and that's going to be a draw for the residents across the city, as well as important recreational opportunities and driving our region. So we have to be efficient and organized about our investments as well. One of the things that CDOT has been doing is investing resources in our project coordination office so that we can work to coordinate and sequence appropriately all of the different work in the right of way, all of these different infrastructure investments that CDOT is making and sister agencies at the state and local level. And so through better coordination to make sure that we're not coming in behind and ripping up newly completed work, we're saving millions of dollars a year as well. So we're able to all collectively stretch our dollars further. Since 2012, we've saved about $47 million through those improved coordination efforts. So that really starts to hit home and help to ensure that we're doing everything we can to leverage dollars as much as possible in this larger environment where every dollar really counts, because we don't have that certainty at the state and the federal level. And we don't even have certainty about the baseline. And that's, folks have already mentioned that, but that's the real critical thing to get across, is that we're fighting just to keep what we have when we know what we have is not enough. And so, as Leanne mentioned, there's a lot of debate now just on the operating side, but you see bills put forward at the state and federal level that would also impact the baseline for capital funding as well. So it's critical for the continued economic engine of the region and to compete globally that we have more longer-term sustainable sources and diverse sources as well, so that we can withstand cyclical impacts of certain funding streams.
Rebecca, your comments also remind me about how this is one thing that economists of all stripes of the spectrum agree on, that infrastructure has among the strongest return on investment. So if we've got to make tough choices about where to invest, this is clearly one of the biggest yields. So I'm going to actually ask to all four of you a question that wraps together many of the themes that we've touched on here. What I'm interested in is considering the lessons from some of the pain of the past, but also watching some of the successes of projects locally or other states around the country. What do you think are the most important takeaways for us here in Chicago, the region, and the state, for mounting the most effective messages to engage all of the decision makers and the public? And is there a project that you think exemplifies the ability to tell that story? So how do we best present the arguments, and then is there a face that you would put on what we could do? Anyone want to start?
Magic bullet for money? Sure, I'll take it.
Yeah, go for it.
Take a crack at that. So, this is the key question. How do you get it done? How do you raise revenue for infrastructure that we all know is important? I think we look to the recent past and we look to our neighbors. We have, as I think Yona showed, 13 states now since the federal government has stayed flat that are raising revenue on their own. Here locally, I think the tollway is a really good example of a way that they can take a controversial, mildly, fare increase and get it done, and do so in a way that was transparent and really engage stakeholders across the spectrum. I even think of a good example downstate in the Metro East area. There, they were challenged by FEMA that their levees were not up to snuff, and that the federal government was going to require everyone behind that levee to pay fairly expensive flood insurance. They went down to the General Assembly and passed a sales tax regionally to upgrade those levees. I think it might have been the only regional sales tax that we passed during that certain governor's administration. So I think when you can show in a very clear, concrete way to voters, to your constituency, what you will be getting for the money, I think that that consistently has been proven to work. And the legislators who go out on a limb and take those votes have come back. And I think I was just looking at something for Tea for America, who sort of watches a lot of this stuff, that 98+% of folks who have taken a vote for increased revenue for infrastructure have, cleared a primary, and then I think 100% after that.
Excellent
have won
data
their election.
point, right?
Yeah, I agree actually with Tom. I mean, my stint at the tollway, it was very obvious. If you put together a capital program, you actually explicitly stated, we're going to raise fees X, but we're going to deliver you these projects. People didn't necessarily like it, but they knew what they were paying for, what they were buying. And I think in the transit space, we've got to do a better job of telling that story with specific projects, and it's all for it. My hope is all four agencies, RTA, CTA, Metro, and PACE, can all speak to each other's capital programs and sort of what we're looking to deliver, point to some successes. I think Metro just did a very courageous thing. For the first time, really in ever, or a very long time, they actually put together a long-term capital plan and publicly talked about what these fare increases were going to deliver. Now we hope we can keep and live up to that with some of the other challenges that we're facing right now on the operating side. But that was pretty courageous and a bold step for Metro to sort of step forward, and we wanted to have their back in doing that. And I think we, all four agencies in the transit space and across all transportation agencies, I think we all should be collectively working together. I don't live just on a sort of a transit space I live in the highway space too. The buses use roads just as much, as anybody else. And so we have to collectively work together and sort of leverage our partnerships so we don't also come off as seeing in the public, I think, as competing with each other. And I think that's an important piece of the story.
In terms of specific opportunities, a couple things come to mind that are critical projects in the planning stages, but are great examples of collaboration between agencies and at the local, state, and federal level. Projects like reconstruction of the Eisenhower Expressway, where you have a facility where you have the integrated transit way in the middle, and that's the same age as the Dan Ryan portion of the Red Line, the South Red Line, which was just a major reconstruction effort by the CTA and a tremendous success in terms of transportation investments and providing better access for South Side residents and really improving the entire regional economy. The Eisenhower is the next opportunity where we have a combination of the highway facility along with the transit infrastructure, and IDOT and CTA have been working together on the environmental planning for that, but it's a real opportunity to get it right and to do it together. North Lakeshore Drive, CDOT and IDOT have been co-leading that, and that's the opportunity for the next generation. We did a tremendous amount of investment on redesign on South Lakeshore Drive that's been very successful. We have to address the capacity issues and the outdated geometrics of North Lakeshore Drive, and you have the whole open space and alternative transportation, active transportation aspects of it. So that's another example where all these coming together, and it's again for examples of investments that are needed. Union Chicago, another example, and that hits at the level as well. Critical for the whole capacity, for the whole in terms of interstate rail, local commuter rail to transit, and really also about jobs and continued growth for the hub here. So three kind of programs on the horizon that have a lot of sweat equity going in, and we're going to need real dollars on the table to make those a reality.
And there's probably not one individual in the region, but those three particular programs touch and improve their lives. Kirk, I know you continue to be an expert on Illinois, but you've given us advice already about what
You're focused on the region, and I think those are some great examples of what helps the Chicago region I would also broaden our other partners
Yep.
in the state. Okay, who else is going to benefit from this? What other big cities, and what are their projects like? Because then when you go in, you're talking at state, and yes, you've got some Chicago projects. You know, they're going to be on the first on the list, but there's
Right.
also a project in all of these other cities that I think give you a very broad base to work from, as opposed to, oh, it's just Chicago talking again.
That's a key point.
And I don't know the.
We've got a map on our accelerateillinois.com. Did I get that right? Yes, that has a map of illustrative projects statewide. And then the maps that we referred to before that are by Senate district, you've got a range, and we haven't finished all of them, but they're being developed for every part of the state, and that localizing is so key, both the messenger and the projects. I have more questions, but I'm going to turn to you next. My colleagues, Scott Farley over here and Yona Freemark over here, have microphones. We are recording this both live and for posterity on YouTube, so wait till the microphone gets to you, and we'll get to your questions. Was there a question back there behind? Nope. Okay, Alan? He'll hold the microphone.
Oh, they always know what I'm going to do. I had a question for Kirk. I'm just wondering how high-speed rail fits in Michigan's plans.
That's a great question. Well, we already have trains going 110 miles an hour from Kalamazoo down to Indiana. We are improving the rail lines, actually, with Joe Zabel's help. We purchased 150 miles of Norfolk Southern rail from Kalamazoo back to Dearborn, and we're in the process of upgrading that. We hope that next year we start doing some additional testing on 110 miles an hour from Dearborn. We are very interested in a solution on the south side of Chicago, because our trains can fly across Michigan and then they come to a stop. So the congestion that happens in Chicago is very, very important to us. And Joel will remember this. I had the fortune or misfortune of explaining to the prior governor why an investment in rail in Illinois was actually a good thing for us when it was a Tiger grant. And I said, that will help us more than anything, because if Illinois can fix this.
Both on
So
freight
we're
and on
there.
high-speed rail, it has to be a Midwest collaborative, and your voice we appreciate.
What we refer to it as enhanced speed rail, because it's not 250 miles an hour. 110 is just fine. 250 means you're going to bypass a bunch of cities, and that's not going to work.
All right, let's get to some more questions. Can you get over there? Thank you.
I really appreciated my name's Leighton Olson, and I'm an attorney and have been involved in telecommunication, economic development, and in transportation. I'm very interested in data-driven performance indicators, and you described a lot of things. What has been have you used infrastructure assemblies or service quality assemblies in areas of, say, 100 to 200,000 as the building block, as opposed to these wider areas, so you get feedback on cost savings or safety in local areas, so that you have that all over the area. And in Chicago, for example, there's planning in the city of Chicago for 16 infrastructure platforms, where someplace like CDOT could help coordinate, dig once or figuring out, which red lights to keep or not. But you could have the local, as opposed to then feed into a wider metropolitan or interstate. So I wanted to see, have you used local consumer assemblies on a regular basis, say every year, to say where we've...
Leighton, and I'm going to turn that question into a more general question on metrics, both for Kirk and for the team.
I can start, and this is a chance for me to get ahead of my skis and my CMAP hat on, and really a shout out to the staff of CMAP, who has been leading the country in performance-driven metrics. And really, if the federal government gave us anything in the last bill, it was a whole new paradigm of how to make our funding decisions through performance-based, data-driven, and transparent ways. And this actually piggybacks off of your initial question of how can we get this done, what projects, what works. I think we also have to bring this component of reform to the conversation, that our decisions are now going to be made not in the back rooms, not via earmarks. Those days are gone. that they are going to be transparent, collaborative, data-driven, and performance-driven. And having that available to the folks and then translating that down to the ground level, I think is going to really help us sell what we need to do to get more revenue in the region.
Yeah, in the transit space, we've been doing performance measures since 2008, and we actually just did our most recent update to our board. We do it on an annual basis. We do peer performance evaluations, compare ourselves to across the country to other transit systems. We also sort of track ourselves against ourselves essentially as well. And we keep that data and use that data. We work actually pretty closely with CMAP, so sort of our more deconstructed data, if you will, or measures rolls up to their more regional measures. And then I think the key space for us to now take the next advances is on the capital infrastructure side specifically. And we've spent several years developing capital assessment plans, and then using that to develop prioritization approaches and translating that so it isn't in a back room, it is accountable, people understand the decisions being made. The challenge, though, I think we all face is, there's so little money to go around that everything is basically safety, safety, safety. It's sort of keeping Band-Aids on things. And so it's hard to sort of show the big fancy projects, too, when we're just sort of, limping along with the monies that we have. But I think it is important to tell those stories and identify what those projects are, why those decisions were made, and how we've delivered them, and how it's had an impact on operations or people's quality of lives.
Excellent. Kirk?
So,
I think you said you had metrics coming out your ears.
yeah, we probably have, I don't know, you get down to individual areas, hundreds of different metrics that the different operational units are using. You got to roll them up to get, what's the key 25 or something. One of the pieces that we've been doing what we call asset management with an asset management council since 1997, which is really what is data-driven analysis that says, here's the decisions you make because here's what your system looks like, and you make different repairs at different times. And we are very supportive of the MAP 21 performance measures that were in there. But one of the things that we've just, as we've really been diving into it in the last couple of months, as they're going through the rulemaking process, we actually are headed for a disaster. We just gave an update to our Transportation Commission yesterday that said the performance measure that says interstates, state of good repair, 95% good. That's going to take all of our federal money, which means the whole rest of the system is going to get zero, none, and it's going to fall apart. And so we're going to get graded, the federal government saying, here's where you got to put all your money. And then we have the rest of this highway system. You should do something with that too, but we're not going to give you any money for that. So I think there's going to be some significant pushback. I mean, we were very supportive of those metrics, but the fact of the matter is Congress is not providing the money to take care of their basic infrastructure, even on the interstates. So the best part is the metrics help us determine that. Before we just say, okay, well, that's great. That's how much money we get. Well, actually we'll be able to use the metrics backwards and say, okay, look, Congress, and look, Federal Highway, you can't do that because this is the outcome that will happen. So,
Especially when it's been officially stated as an
Right.
important value. In Illinois, we're not in the same place that Michigan is, but having been a co-chair of Governor Rauner's Transition Committee on Infrastructure, I know how strongly supported that recommendation was embraced, looking at places like CMAP as a model, not to have the state force top-down evaluation criteria, but to have them as a state, which are then regionally adapted and weighted differently in different locations. That's some of the work ahead, and I think it's very important for all of us, MPC and more, to engage in that discussion. Simultaneously with this capital funding debate, we have to have great criteria to evaluate projects in the pipeline and then to evaluate their impact to tell the story, because this is obviously something that you're constantly working at, and if you don't have good data, you can't tell your story. We have time for probably a couple more questions. Thank you, right up front.
Hey, so my name is Matthew Stegeman. I'm here on behalf of the Center for Neighborhood Technology's Transit Future campaign, which is a campaign to raise additional revenue for transit in Cook County. So this question is primarily for Tom. So in an environment where we have multiple competing or overlapping proposals for increased revenue for infrastructure, including Accelerate Illinois, Transit Future, and CMAP's Fund 2040 proposal, how do we address the perception that these proposals overlap or do compete with one another? And what steps do you think we can take as a county, as a region, as a state to advocate for all of these proposals?
Sure. First and foremost, it's great that there's more than zero. I mean, that is, in my experience, something over the last 12 years that we haven't had this kind of heavyweight push from the nonprofit sector, from the government sector, from the advocacy sector, pushing for more revenue in a serious, legitimate way. And I think it is a perception. One of the things that I think we can collectively do is carry that voice down to Springfield and up to Congress to say, we need to start creating our own destiny, and here is why. And as you could tell, all of the things that we're working on, whether they be reformed through a performance-driven approach or a media campaign that MPC is really sort of, I think, doing in a novel way, where they're bringing it down to the person level in Peoria who can't stand it. I think that's together, if we can, and we are speaking with one voice. And we should, formalize that. We can do that through letters in different ways. And I just even think about our CMAP board who adopted Accelerate Illinois. We are absolutely all on the same team. And quite frankly, it's going to take us and a whole lot more players to make this move.
And from MPC's perspective, we've been working closely with our partners at CNT and others like Active Transportation Alliance involved with both efforts. And we're really committed to making sure that is the last thing we have to spend time worrying about. I would say that the time is now at the statewide level because these issues get done in the first year of a 4-year term. They just do. And given the fact that Cook County just recently peeled back its sales tax, I think that's a longer-term debate about figuring out a Cook County unique contribution. But we're never going to close the door on any debate about how we can raise more revenues to improve our transportation choices in the region. So if we can join forces on the immediate opportunity, that might help build this confidence and momentum. Is there one last question burning out there? Thanks.
Good afternoon. My question relates to the raising of the gas tax in Michigan. You stressed the importance of building a broad coalition, and I was wondering if you could speak to the ways in which municipal governments have played a role in that coalition.
Yeah, that's a great question. We have two groups, actually multiple groups. One's called the County Road Association. We have this unique governmental group in Michigan called County Road Commissions. They aren't under the county government. It's a little odd, but so we have county. We bring in the Michigan Association of Counties. We bring in the County Road Association. So there's two different ones. But then municipals, we work through a group called the Michigan Municipal League, and they really represent both the road and the transit side, and really the urban needs for us, along with the Public Transit Association as well. And the Municipal League in Michigan is really quite strong, speak with a pretty strong voice. So having them on board is probably one of the keys. And then through it, through them we pull in additional, the bigger mayors or the bigger city mayors to weigh in as much as possible. In fact, yesterday the governor was having a press conference with a couple of the larger city mayors. He's done one before with Mayor Duggan from Detroit, and those mayors were saying, we support this. The interesting thing, one tidbit I'll leave you with is, governors will, pass out a business card. Governor Snyder now is passing out chunks of concrete. And they're little pieces like this, and he said, in Germany they sold the Berlin Wall. I'm giving away pieces of Michigan Bridge. And he gives, I've seen him give them to people, and they're about this big, and he goes, here's your piece of a Michigan Bridge, and it's been,
And we've got more
gets people's attention.
where that came from, right? Falling down every day.
He asked me, he said, could I get some of that? You got any more? And I said, where do you want it delivered? I got a whole truck full.
You got a dump truck full. That is very clever, and we welcome your clever ideas. Kirk. That was terrific. We hope you are successful in early May. Me too. And we will only benefit each other if we're all successful. But thank you for making the trip here and for sharing your insights, and to Rebecca and Leanne and Tom for your tremendous contributions. A quick round of applause for all of them. And a quick final note from me, please do go to accelerateillinois.com. Sign up as an individual, sign up as an organization. All of you are part of a neighborhood or professional association, so if we're going to help with this multiplier effect that Kirk challenged us about, we're going to have to bring this message to many other groups. If you've got a meeting, a group of folks coming together in a room, we will come talk with you and have this kind of discussion together. So please come to us with any of those ideas. MPC has a full spring of events. We've given you 2 invitations on paper for you to check your calendars. One is our after-work format is called our Urban Think and Drink, and we welcome you joining us on April 21st, former Chicagoan Tony Griffin, talking about city reinvention. And also in May, you may not be aware, there's something called National Infrastructure Week. May 13th, mark your calendar, please join us. We're looking for ideas about making the most of this, as well as sponsors. And so I'm going to talk to some of you in the room about that right now. Thank you.